the International Soccer Preview, and we are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to Series 19, looking at the groups and teams of the 2023 Asian Cup, played in January 2024. This episode is looking at Group B: Japan, Iraq, Vietnam, and Indonesia. Here we go. It's the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada, Series 19. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Connor, and today we are looking at Group D for the Asian Cup 2023 tournament, which takes place in January 2024. And this group includes Japan, Iraq, Vietnam, and Indonesia.
Yeah, we usually give some information about our past, present, and future media casts at this point. But if you want that, we'll direct you to the video on our YouTube homepage, which covers that information. And the address is on the screen if you're watching this on YouTube. And for listeners, it is youtube.com/@soccerfiles.
Yeah, we'll just say here that a couple of series are still current. African Cup 2023 qualifying wrapped up in early September, and we'll be doing a series on that tournament, also taking place in January 2024. And also current is Series 14 on Euro 2024 qualifying. They can be found in our YouTube playlist and on our podcast homepage. Again, the links are available in the show notes.
Yeah, lots of information in the show notes. And we'll also be doing a series on players for the Asian Cup and possibly an update podcast closer to the actual tournament. But meanwhile, let's get on with this group.
Yeah, so this series previews the groups and teams for Asian Cup 2023, which confusingly takes place in January 2024. And we're going to cover our usual information.
Yeah, we haven't really done Asia yet. We did the last round of World Cup qualifying for the top teams, but let's look at the three sections that we'll cover in this podcast. So in part one, we'll introduce the teams in the group and a bit of, demographical information about them.
Yeah, part two, we'll do an overview of each team's history and recent form. So this series features a deep dive into each team's history in the Regional Cup, which is the Asian Cup. And then the Asian region is further divided into what we call localities. And they play a big role. So part two touches on the often neglected aspect of the team's histories.
Yeah, and then part three will be our usual comparison of the teams in terms of ranking, head-to-head records, and we're going to end with a discussion of their prospects and our predictions. How have we done on our predictions, Connor?
In other series, I can't say we've maybe got A+, but I think the discussions are always interesting. Let's say.
Yeah, that's right. There were 12 African Cup groups. I'm going off a bit off topic here, but we had 12 African Cup groups, and actually I'd have to go over to guess what we predicted. But there were at least two groups where the pot 4 team finished second and advanced. So I'm kind of curious to go back and see if we predicted any of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but the discussions and predictions are fun anyways, and we'll get there at the end.
Yeah, that's right. Well, definitely part of the fun is that we're taken by surprise by certain teams. So let's jump right into part one and give a little information on each of the countries.
Yeah, so Japan, we'll start with. They're the pot 1 team. Their soccer nickname is Samurai Blue. And Japan, of course, is an island nation on the far eastern edge of Asia, near Russia, China, and the Koreas. And Japan has a population of 124 million, so really a huge country.
Yes, it is. All right, well, team number 2 is Iraq.
Yeah, Iraq, their nickname is the Lions of Mesopotamia. And Iraq is a mostly landlocked country in the Middle East, and it shares its main borders with Turkey to the north, Syria to the east, Saudi Arabia to the south, and Iran to the west.
That's right. Okay, and team number 3, Vietnam.
Vietnam, their nickname is either the Red Warriors or the Golden Star Warriors, which both nicknames are a reference to their flag. And Vietnam is a long, skinny country in Southeast Asia with a long coastline on the South China Sea, part of the Pacific. And its land neighbors are China, Laos, and Cambodia.
All right. Oh, and the population.
Population, yeah, sorry, 99 million in Vietnam. I had no idea it was so big. I'm not sure if you did.
No, twice as big as, I'm thinking twice as big as South Korea, but South Korea's population has gotten bigger. No, much bigger than I thought, to be
Yeah.
honest.
And I didn't
But
mention
I was always surprised by Indonesia.
Yeah. I'll just mention, I don't know if I said the population for Iraq. It's 45 million, so still a large country. But going ahead to Indonesia, their nickname is the Red and White, or Team Garuda. Garuda is a mythical bird that's also a national symbol. And Indonesia is a sprawling country of over 17,000 islands. It extends over 5,000 kilometers from east to west and nearly 2,000 kilometers from north to south. So just a massive country. And its population is huge too. It's 272 million. That's the third largest in Asia behind just India and China.
Yeah, when I first saw that, I was really shocked. I mean, that's, I think, bigger or about the same size as the USA.
Yeah, not far behind.
Hmm. Okay, well, we have four big countries here, and maybe we'll just do a comparison of the four of them there.
Yeah, so starting with the largest, it's actually Indonesia, 272 million people. Second is Japan. Japan has 124 million. So that's about half of what Indonesia is, just for comparison.
Hmm.
Next is Vietnam with 99 million people. So again, a huge population there. And then Iraq is the smallest, but still with a healthy 45 million people. So, like you said, four really large countries in this group.
Yeah, I honestly think I would have thought Vietnam about the same as Iraq. Both of those, even Iraq is bigger than Canada. We're about what, 39 million now?
Yeah, right around 40. So, yeah.
Wow, big countries. Okay. And where are we? We're going to move on to part two, and we'll begin with Japan. So we're going to just begin kind of with a couple of overviews and then get into more detail as we go. So this is just an overview of Japan's participation and strength. So their first international game was in 1917. And Japan's a bit of an unusual team with odd parallels to the USA in several ways. So both Japan and USA have a long history, but that's not widely recognized. Both were weak and fairly anonymous until the 1990s, at which time they both became a power in their respective regions and showed some form on the World Cup stage.
Japan entered the 1938 World Cup, but then withdrew, a fact that even many devout soccer fans are not aware of. Like Germany, they were banned for their role in World War II in the 1950 World Cup, but re-entered in 1954. They did not enter in 1958, did in 1962, and then joined the Asian African boycott in 1966. From 1970, Japan's participated regularly. In Asian Cup competition, it was a similarly patchy start and actually went on for much longer. They did not enter the first three competitions beginning from 1956, so their first was 1968. They then missed three of the next four, entering in 1976, and then returning in 1988, from which time they've joined consistently.
All right, a pretty patchy history there. And Japan's local group is the East Asian Football Federation, or EAFF. And that group consists of 10 countries. The biggest ones are China, South Korea, and then a step down North Korea and Hong Kong, and then some smaller countries, Mongolia, Taiwan, Macau, and Guam. And Northern Mariana Islands fairly recently joined. Their tournament, though, is a very simple four-team round robin. So Japan has taken part in each of the 8 editions from its start in 2003, and actually they receive an automatic spot. But Japan has only won one of the 8 editions, that was in 2013.
In terms of strength, Japan was virtually a non-entity until 1986, their first World Cup qualification that was truly competitive. It was followed by their first successful qualification for the Asian Cup in 1988. With their first Asian Cup win in 1992, they abruptly became a top-tier team in the region and have maintained that. In the new millennium, they are mounting an argument as a second-tier team at the global level.
That's right. Okay, speaking of which, we're doing this in September 2023, kind of ahead of time. And Japan, I don't know if you know this, Connor, they beat Germany in a friendly, causing Germany's manager to be fired.
Yeah, I think that was in Germany too, 4-2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So, yeah, they are kind of becoming a bit of a world power there. But okay, let's carry on with the history. And for the World Cup, we're just going to do an overview because this podcast is focused more on the regional. And Japan's early World Cup history bears little mention, actually, because of the fact that they did enter the World Cup as early as 1938, even if they withdrew. And they did, as Connor said, enter all but 2 cups from 1954 onwards, but they were weak, knocked out quickly, usually at the hands of South Korea. It was only from 1986 that they showed some strength, reaching the final knockout round, and 1994 was the first time they reached a final group stage. They fell just short there in what is excellently dubbed as the agony of Doha. They fell just short at the qualification tournament being in Qatar there. But they did reach the World Cup in 1998 and then every time thereafter. Reaching the round of 16 in 2002 was put down to their hosting of the tournament or co-hosting of it, but doing so again 3 out of 4 times from 2010 has made them a respectable world power.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's overview the Asian Cup before our deep dive.
So Japan arrived on the Asian Cup scene in 1988, having entered only twice before that in 1968 and 1976, failing to qualify both times. They proved weak in that 1988 Cup, and one would not have predicted their success in the following Cup, even given them hosting. But they won the title in 1992 and roughly every second edition thereafter, always passing their group stage. Their worst recent finish was in 2015 when they went out in the quarterfinals.
That's right. I'm going to take a bit of a deep dive now into their finals, or should we do their local cup history first?
Yeah, why don't we do the local cup history?
Okay. Well, in their local EAFF group, the East Asian Football Federation, South Korea actually still reigns, so they're very competitive with each other. The rivalry is always fierce between the two, and they, along with China, tend to take the competition very seriously. Japan has won, as we mentioned, only one of the 8 editions since its start in 2003, but then did win the most recent edition in 2022. Until then, even China had outperformed Japan, winning 2 titles, though they generally do better than China and have come second in the competition 5 times. Okay, let's go back to our deep dive then.
All right. So Japan first reached the Asian Cup in 1988. As we said, they were a weak team up to that point and only managed a single draw over their 4 games, tying Iran in the opener. That was in the 1998 Asian Cup. So their strength in 1992 was thus a surprise. Hosting the tournament, they actually started off with 2 draws against the UAE and North Korea, but a win over Iran secured them first place. But the basis for that is not clear since they were tied on all counts with the UAE. That's goals for, against, and goal difference. Nevertheless, that brought them to a semifinal round where they beat China, and then they took their first title win, first title with the win over Saudi Arabia, 1-0 in the final.
Right. So we saw on the YouTube there kind of a long list of non-qualifications or non-entries. but we're not really dealing with the qualification here, just with the final. So in 1996, the tournament expanded to 16 teams and then included a quarterfinal stage. In all three group stage games, they won on late goals, but in the quarterfinals, they were ousted by Kuwait. They were imperious in 2000, though, beating Saudi Arabia 4-1, going up 5-0 on Uzbekistan by the 24th minute, and eventually winning 8-1 over Uzbekistan. And then in the third game, actually just tying Qatar. So it was 4-1 over Iraq in the quarterfinal, but more competitive scorelines over China and then Saudi Arabia in the final. But they did win their second title there.
Yeah, over Saudi Arabia both times. 2004 made it 2 titles in a row, but this one was hard fought after the group stage. They were taken to penalties by Jordan in the quarterfinal and went down 2-0 in the shootout, but Japan recovered to win 4-3 and proceed to the semifinal, where they battled with Bahrain. Bahrain actually scored 4 minutes from time to take the lead. Japan then equalized at 90 and scored a golden goal quickly in extra time at 93 minutes. It was host China who Japan met in the final, and it was a 3-1 win. But Japan had gotten away with handball on their second goal, and China was furious about the refereeing. There was rioting in the streets, and Japanese fans were stuck in the stadium for 3 hours, that after claiming their third title over the hosts.
Yes, China was not happy. That was actually the first Asian Cup I watched on TV, because I was in Korea at the time, so I was able to get coverage. Anyway, 2007 opened with a tie against Qatar, who they seemed to struggle with, but they won their next 2 games. The quarterfinal with Australia went to penalties, and their goalkeeper saved the first 2 there to earn the win. However, they lost to Saudi Arabia in the semi-final and then lost to South Korea to finish 4th. In the banter before the game, Japan had said that they would teach South Korea how to play soccer.
Wow.
But as it turned out, South Korea taught them how to smother a game and earn a dull 1-0 win.
Oh, good for Korea. 2011 also started with a draw against Jordan, as of the previous edition. And in fact, Japan only salvaged that point with an injury time equalizer. Once again, they won their next 2 matches to take the group, humiliating Saudi Arabia with a 5-0 victory in the third match. After beating Qatar, getting the better of them this time, they had a great battle with South Korea in the semifinals. It was 1-1 after regulation time and 2-2 after extra time. They did teach their rivals how to manage a shootout, though, winning 3-0 on penalties. The final also went to extra time after a goalless regulation time, but Japan beat Australia with a winning goal there to take their 4th title.
All right, well, the following cup in 2015 was in Australia, and Japan won all their group stage games for the first time, actually, since 1996. UAE scored early in the quarterfinal and held the lead until Japan equalized at 81. The match eventually went to penalties, where Japan's best players missed their shots and they were shocked out in the quarterfinals. That's their worst finish since 1996 there.
Yeah, only made it to the last 8. 2019, I guess we'll talk about through their recent history. And I guess we'll start with qualifying there. So qualifying for the 2019 Asian Cup was the same for the first 2 rounds as the 2018 World Cup. And they easily won their round 2 of 3 group stage, which put them through into the tournament automatically. Once they...
yeah, those teams that didn't finish in the top 2 went on to a further round, while Japan and Syria, in this case, went on to the 3rd round of World Cup qualifying.
That's right, but no more worries about qualifying for the Cup. So in the Cup, Japan won all 3 group games again, beating Turkmenistan, Oman, and Uzbekistan. And then it was a series of shutout victories in the final stages over Saudi Arabia, Vietnam, and Iran until they met the unstoppable force of Qatar in the final. And Japan lost 3-1. So unable to claim a fifth title, but they did reach it to the final in 2019.
Right, a bit more agony at the hands of Qatar there.
That's right.
The next tournament in their recent history was actually the local cup, the EAFF Cup in 2022. Let's take a look at that one.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Japan claimed their second title. Japan opened with a big 6-0 victory over Hong Kong, tied China, but then met South Korea in the crucial third game, and they won that game convincingly 3-0 to finish top of the round robin.
Yeah, big win for Japan there, their second title. And now we take a look at their World Cup 2022 campaign.
So Japan entered in the round 2 of 3 group stage. They didn't really face much competition there. There wasn't really a true pot 2 team. So they won that group stage convincingly, 8 wins from 8. That qualified them for the Asian Cup this edition, but also put them in the last round of World Cup qualifying. Japan lost to Oman at home in their opening game, and were in 4th place after 4 games with another loss to Saudi Arabia. But consistency after that saw them claw their way back to the top of the group going into the last game, although they squandered it with a home tie to the last place finishers Vietnam. So they finished 2nd out of 6 behind Saudi Arabia, but ahead of Australia, who they beat twice, and that was good enough for automatic qualification.
Yeah, 7 points ahead of Australia there.
Yeah, very convincing. So then at the World Cup in Qatar, they opened the tournament with a come-from-behind win over Germany. Their fast attack kind of overwhelming the Germans in the second half. And they did the same to Spain in Game 3, winning that game 2-1 as well. Kind of strangely, the game in between those two was against Costa Rica, where they made several lineup changes and ended up losing 1-0. Nevertheless, they finished first in the group stage thanks to their 2 victories over the European giants. That put them to the round of 16, where they met Croatia. That game went 1-1, and Japan lost in penalties.
Yeah, scoring only one of their penalties in the final there.
Yeah.
I think I remember our media cast for this one, and I wouldn't be surprised if we predicted exactly the opposite of what happened.
I think so. Yeah, losses to Germany and Spain and victory over Costa Rica. I'm sure that's what we said.
Yeah. We said they might make it through, but it would be a surprise, and it was. So good for them.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the last recent tournament will be the qualifying for this tournament.
Yeah, and we kind of touched on that already because there's overlap with the World Cup qualifying. Japan won all 8 games in the round 2 or 3 group stage. Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Mongolia, and Myanmar, the competition. Japan scored 46 goals and suffered just 2 goals against, so kind of overwhelming the opposition there.
Right, and that got them automatic entry while the other teams went on to a further round. Okay, well, for players, we had planned on doing a player section in this podcast, just kind of an overview, but we decided in the end that it made the media cast too long and kind of took us away from the focus on the team. So stay tuned, though, because we will be doing a series on players, and also because we're doing this well in advance, we might do an update podcast shortly before the tournament, and we could include the overview of players in that media cast. So that brings us actually to the end of Japan and to the beginning of Iraq. And we start with an overview of their participation and strength in world football.
So Iraq began qualification for the World Cup in 1974, but they withdrew in 1978. Since 1982, though, Iraq has entered consistently. Having first participated in the Asian Cup in 1972, they did not enter the next 4 from 1980 to 92, but after that, Iraq has entered without fail.
That's right. And their local zone is the West Asian Football Federation, or WAFF. WAF. WAF originally consisted of 6 member nations, and Iraq was among them. But in 2009 and 10, 7 other Gulf nations joined the group. However, that tournament became inconsistent with only one edition after 2014, and that's likely because there were other local tournaments in the area that overshadowed it. So the Gulf Nations Cup has a much longer history, played roughly every 2 years since 1970. Iraq actually didn't enter early editions of that Gulf Nations Cup, and they were banned from 1992 to 2003 because of the Gulf War. But their participation has been consistent from 2004. I think they actually hosted the last edition. The other tournament that detracts from the WAF Nations Cup is the Arab Cup. Iraq actually didn't enter the first edition of that in 1963, but then joined consistently after that until they were banned from that also in the 1990s. But the tournament has only 2 editions since they were banned, but it became very popular in 2021. This is the Arab Cup now, and its FIFA backing suggests that it'll be playing a more regular role in the region. So not sure, Connor, what's going to become of their local group. The WAF Cup seems a bit too crowded for that competition.
Yeah, well, I'm very curious to see if the Arab Cup will continue. It was a very neat idea bringing teams together from Asia and Africa.
Yeah.
In terms of strength, Iraq are a second-tier team, but appear stronger the more local a tournament is. They have qualified for only one World Cup, but in recent times they usually reach the final round of qualification. They generally reach beyond the group stage of the Asian Cup, and their one title there came as a shock. In the 3 local tournaments, they have had a great success, especially in the early years, and Iraq remains one of the strongest among the many second-tier nations in the Middle East.
Right, and so we will be taking a bit of a closer look at some of those tournaments. But for the World Cup, we're just going to give an overview, so a bit more detail than we gave, but not too much. Go ahead.
So in World Cup play, Iraq met with some early success, coming 1 point short in 1974 and then reaching the finals in 1986. They lost all 3 games once there, though, but only by a 1-goal margin in their 3 games with Paraguay, Belgium, and Mexico. Otherwise, they have generally struggled in the World Cup and do well to reach the final round. They have done so about half the time, but when they do, they are out of their depth, finishing last or second last. Such was the case in the last 3 Cups, reaching the final round but finishing in the bottom half of the table, though they are a bit more competitive every time.
Right. Okay. Well, as we said, they get a bit more competitive the smaller the region, and so they look quite a bit better in Asian Cup performances. They at least reach the quarterfinals every time since re-entering after a long absence in 1996. Even still, their win in 2007 was a shock, as they are far from the strongest team in the region. And 4th place in 2015 matched their result during their strong period of the mid-1970s. All right, let's move on to the local tournaments before we do our deep dive into the Asian Cup.
All right, so starting with the WAF, even with the influx of other Gulf nations into the WAF grouping, Iraq has done well in the competition. They won the 2nd edition in 2002 and have finished 2nd in 2 of the other 8 editions, and that includes 2 of the last 3 Cups, including 2019 as host.
Yeah, and that was after all the Gulf nations joined there, so pretty good showing there. And moving on to the Gulf Cup, they won the Gulf Cup 3 out of 5 times between 1979 and 1988, but they haven't done as well after returning from their ban in 2004. If you remember, they were banned for most of the 90s until 2003. So they were knocked out at the group stage in 4 of the 6 editions after that return. But they have come back to strength since, reaching the semi-finals in the last 3 Cups. And, well, we'll get into the most recent Cup, which they hosted in 2023 when we do the recent stuff. How about the Arab Cup, Connor?
So Iraq's biggest success in the Arab Cups were in the early years. After not entering the first edition in 1963, they won the next 4 editions to 1988, with a big gap in the 70s there.
Mm-hmm.
They were banned for 3 editions in the 90s to 2002, but they came third in the following edition in 2012.
All right. Well, let us go back to the Asian Cup now and do the deep dive into the finals of that one. And do you want to take it away?
Sure. So Iraq has qualified for every tournament it has entered. In fact, only in the first of these did they fail to pass the group stage. That was in 1972 when an opening loss to Iran and draw with Thailand saw them finish last in the 3-team group.
Yes, in 1976, despite losing to Iran again in their opener, they beat South Yemen to reach the semi-final. Again, a 3-team group there, and they finished second. In that semi-final, they lost to Kuwait in extra time and then lost to China in the third place match. The result of fourth place is a bit flattering, honestly, because they really just won that single game over South Yemen, and yet it looks good in the history books.
Yeah. Iraq didn't enter the next 4 tournaments from 1980 to 1992, but returned to a tournament expanded to 12 teams in 1966. The group stage ended with 3 teams tied on points and separated by just 1 goal difference, but their third place finish was enough to reach the quarterfinal. There, though, they lost in extra time to the host UAE.
Right, that was in 1996. And in 2000, a tie with Lebanon didn't prevent them from advancing from the group, but it was a loss to Japan in the quarterfinals. And they made it 3 quarterfinal finishes in a row, going out to host China in 2004, having lost to Uzbekistan in the group stage, but advancing over a very poorly performing South Korea. Sorry, not South Korea, Saudi Arabia.
Their success then in 2007 was certainly not foreshadowed in the group stage. That was quite inconsistent, with an impressive 3-1 win over Australia, while tying both Oman and Thailand. It was enough to earn their first ever, and even until now, their only top place finish in a group stage, and it paired them gently with Vietnam in the quarterfinals. Winning that match sent them to a semi-final match with South Korea. That game went scoreless and Iraq won on penalties. In the final, they faced Saudi Arabia and dominated the match. A single goal made them the glorious champions of Asia, but it would have been more but for a good performance from the Saudi keeper.
All right, yeah, real shocker that was. 2011 brought them back to quarterfinal finishes. There they lost to Iran in the group stage, as they so often had, but they did beat UAE and North Korea to finish second in the group. And then they took Australia to extra time in the quarterfinal, but lost that game in the end.
For 2015, after finishing behind Japan in the group stage, this time they met Iran at the quarterfinal stage for perhaps the best Asian Cup game in history. Regular time saw a goal for each side, and a controversial second yellow just before halftime to an Iranian for feigning injury. Extra time featured 4 goals, ending with Iraq scoring a penalty at 1:16 and Iran equalizing at 1:18, as well as a fracas over a perceived dangerous foul on their keeper. The match went to penalties where each side missed their first shot but converted their next 6. Iran missed the 15th penalty, but Iraq scored the 16th to win. The drama did not end there, as Iran delayed their return home in order to pursue an appeal of an Iraqi player that should have been ineligible due to banned substance use at club level, but the matter was dismissed by the AFC. Iraq then went on to lose to South Korea in the semifinals and lose to UAE in the third place match.
Yeah, pretty memorable game there. I really enjoyed that one. Anyway, no such drama in 2019, but we are going to use that as a transition to our recent history section, because that begins with the 2019 Asian Cup. So we will look at qualifying there.
Yeah, so Iraq, like most Asian teams, joined in round 2 of 3. That was a 5-team group stage that actually got reduced to 4 teams when Indonesia were disqualified. And Iraq finished second in the group behind Thailand, ahead of Vietnam and Taiwan. And that qualified them directly for the Asian Cup and also put them into the finals round of World Cup qualifying. At the Asian Cup, they were yet again paired with rivals Iran. Iraq and Iran went goalless in that game, but Iraq had won their other 2 games over Vietnam and Yemen. That put them into a round of 16 match with Qatar, and that was a match which Iraq lost 1-0.
Yeah, right. A bit of a dull follow-up to the Iran-Iraq game of 2015. I remember looking forward to that one, and it just turned out to be a goalless, a pretty uneventful draw.
Yeah.
Okay, well, moving on. The next competition, recent competition, is the WAF Cup in 2019. How did they do there?
Yeah, so they started in a 5-team group stage where they beat Lebanon, Palestine, and Yemen, and tied last place Syria to finish first in the group stage. That brought them just to a one-off final against the other group winner. They met Bahrain and lost that match 1-0.
Right. Okay. So still one of the top teams in the Middle East there. And I think next one is the Arab Cup in 2021.
Yeah, this was a very competitive tournament. Iraq were given automatic qualification. They met Oman, Bahrain, and Qatar in the group stage. And though they tied their first 2 matches, they lost 3-0 to Qatar. That saw them finishing 3rd out of 4 and not advancing beyond the group stage.
Right, not looking like a top Middle East team there, but usually they do a bit better than that. Let's look at the World Cup. Next one is, maybe we'll do the Gulf Cup of Nations before the World Cup qualifying.
Sure. So the Gulf Cup of Nations, that was in 2023, so just recently, and Iraq was the host of that. They tied Oman in the group stage, but then beat both Saudi Arabia and Yemen. They then beat Qatar in the semifinal, and then beat Oman in the final, winning that game 3-2 after extra time. So pretty good performance, beating some pretty good teams in the course of that run to the championship.
Yeah, aided by being host, but they are one of the stronger teams, I would say, in that Middle Eastern region. Usually reaching the final round of World Cup qualification, especially recently, and that's what we're going to look at next, the 2022 World Cup campaign, which was actually before that Gulf Cup of Nations.
Yeah, so they entered as again most teams do in the second round group stage. They were paired with, you guessed it, Iran yet again. Iraq and Iran actually both won their home matches. But Iran finished a point ahead of Iraq, Iraq finishing second. But second was still good enough for automatic qualification for the Asian Cup, and it put them into the last round of World Cup qualifying. There, Iraq ended up finishing fourth of 6, so they missed out on a place in the World Cup, but they were actually 12 points behind, 14 points behind South Korea in second place. They won 1, tied 6, and lost 3 of their games. So kind of an interesting record there.
Yeah, I mean, definitely a second tier team. They're not really capable of challenging South Korea and Iran, but kind of a bit even with the like Lebanon and Syria and UAE, which was their only win actually over UAE. So yes, of course, they didn't make it to the World Cup, and we'll just reiterate what you said about qualifying for this tournament.
Yeah, that was the group stage where Iraq was paired with Iran, who they finished a point behind, but Iraq finished ahead of Bahrain, Hong Kong, and Cambodia. So World Cup qualifying, doubling in Asian Cup qualifying, and they qualified automatically and went on to play the round of World Cup qualification, where a second round of Asian Cup qualifying played out.
Right. Yeah. So here they are in the Asian Cup. And once again, we did have a little piece prepared on their players, but we're going to save that for another time and move on to Vietnam. beginning with an overview of their participation and general strength.
Right. So even though North Vietnam won the war in 1975, they had no soccer history. So therefore, South Vietnam's record is considered the predecessor in what we're going to discuss here. So Vietnam has a long, if interrupted, history. Their entry into the 1954 World Cup was not accepted for reasons unknown, and they didn't enter again until 20 years later in 1974. They withdrew in 1978 and did not enter again until 1994, from which time they've participated consistently. Entry into the Asian Cup was more consistent, beginning with the first one in 1956. During the war, they were absent only in 1972, but played in 1976. However, they disappeared from the Asian soccer scene from 1980 to 92, and then returning in 1996, they have participated consistently since.
Right, and their regional group is the AFF, but the A in the Asian the A stands for ASEAN, which is another acronym. It's an acronym within an acronym, and stands for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So that includes countries like Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, Cambodia, and that. So the first tournament took place in 1996. Actually, that locality was set up a little bit before a lot of the other localities in the Asian region. And they also take the tournament quite seriously. It's held every 2 years. And Vietnam has participated in every edition and won 2 titles in 2000 and in 2008 and the 12th edition in 2018. So 2 titles. Thailand probably the strongest team in that locality.
In terms of strength, Vietnam are a third-tier team that has recently been showing signs of second-tier strength. They have never reached the World Cup, but recently reached the final round for the first time. High hopes were dashed, though, when they lost their first 7 of 10 games. In 2022, they reached the final round of qualifying for the first time. They reached the first 2 Asian Cups, despite not being particularly strong, and reached it again as one of the hosts in 2007. Only in 2019, though, did they show the strength of a second-tier team. Their region is made up of third-tier teams and lower, so they're one of the stronger teams there. And Thailand has generally been the stronger team in the region. And despite Vietnam winning their second regional title in 2018, it remains the case that Thailand is the dominant team.
Right, and we will take a look at that a bit later on. But as we kind of go a little bit deeper in, we'll do the World Cup overview. So in World Cup play, Vietnam has not made a mark. Their first game in 1974 was a win over Thailand, a rivalry that remains strong to this day. But it was only a placement game where both teams advanced. They were absent, as we saw earlier, until 1994, but were very weak, losing to third-tier teams like Singapore and Turkmenistan, and even dropping points to fourth-tier teams like Maldives and Bangladesh. In 2014, they began to look more competitive, but only at the game level, and 2 losses to Thailand in 2018 kept them well short of the final round. However, a new generation in 2022 saw success at the campaign level, and we're going to look at that. Campaign in more detail here. But key point there is that they did reach the final round of qualifying. Okay, let's move on to an overview of the Asian Cup here.
So their Asian Cup success looks much better on record, but a close examination yields some asterisks. 4th place in 1956 and 1960 speak more to their long history than to their strength. They did well to qualify for those tournaments, but in fact only earned a single tie over both tournaments for those results. I think there was just 4 teams competing.
Yeah.
By 2007, they were still not strong enough to qualify for the Asian Cup. through their play, but they earned an automatic entry by dint of being one of the 4 co-hosts. They did well at home, though, passing the group stage over tough opposition. By 2019, they were strong enough to qualify through their own play, though the expansion of the tournament to 24 teams made it easier. And we'll look at that history as well when we talk about their recent tournaments.
Yeah, another asterisk should be placed next to the fact that it appears on first glance that they've passed the group stage in every tournament they've reached. And that actually is the case. But we saw that their 4th place finishes were not as impressive as it looks. Again, though, a nice mark on their record, eh?
Yeah.
Okay, well, before we do the deep dive, we'll take a quick look at the ASEAN Cup, or the AFF group that they're in. And the local level ASEAN Football Federation, that's Southeast Asian nations, offers them kind of really competition at their own level. Thailand is the strongest team, but there are sometimes challenges by Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, along with Vietnam. So those teams proved competitive enough, such that prior to recent times, Vietnam had only one title, that was in 2008, and one second place finish as host in 1998. So on the weaker end, they failed to finish in the top 4 twice, and they were knocked out at the group stage as co-host in 2004 and in 2012. They weren't hosts that year. Their only title in 2008 parallels their success in the 2007 Asian Cup, marking a bit of a strong period for them. However, a much stronger recent period was previewed by their second title win in 2018. We're going to see in the recent look how they've kind of done well in their recent years. So let's go back to the deep dive for the Asian Cup, and again, we'll take a look at how those 4th place finishes in the first 2 cups actually went down.
Right, so Vietnam, or specifically South Vietnam, was one of 19 teams to enter into the first Asian Cup in 1956. Their real accomplishment was qualifying, because once there, they were out of their depth. They tied their opening game with Hong Kong, but lost to Israel and South Korea by the interesting scoreline of 5-3, though they were behind from the 5th minute onwards. It was even more true in 1960, where they lost 5-1 to both South Korea and Israel and 3-1 to China. So the 2 4th place finishes shines on their records, but it was the structure of the competition, being just a 4-team group stage, that flatters them. In truth, the round robin formats measured the result by final placement in the group, and that was earned on 2 last place finishes
in the group. Nevertheless, when one looks at the records, it's like, wow, 4th place finishes. Okay, well, Vietnam didn't reach another tournament until 2007, and even then, only by dint of hosting alongside 4 other Southeast Asian countries. They were a weak team to that point, and they had only ever been competitive with 4th or arguably 3rd tier teams. However, in the 2004 Asian Cup qualifying, they had snatched a win in South Korea, and in 2006 World Cup qualifying, they tied Lebanon in the final game. So those results certainly didn't predict beating UAE and tying Qatar, both of those solid second-tier teams, to pass the group stage behind Japan in 2007. And they went on to the quarterfinal, where they lost to Iraq, but a pretty good showing given their weaker history, eh?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So while that success can be put down to home advantage, it did boost Vietnam into being a more competitive team. At the game level, at least, they took points from 3rd and 2nd tier teams, even if it didn't improve their results at the campaign level. This only came to fruition in 2019, when the expansion of the Cup allowed their improvement to show. And I guess we'll talk about that. I guess it's a good segue. We can talk about that right now.
Yeah, I think we should continue on, but now we are at the beginning of the recent history, the 2019 Asian Cup. But I think you should keep going there because this is more of an overview of their improvement.
Yeah. So really in 2019, Vietnam was excited about a new generation of talented youngsters, and they looked more convincing in their qualification. They were more competitive in the tournament also, although improved play didn't yield better results, and ambitions were crushed in the tournament with losses to Iraq and Iran in their first two games. A win over Yemen in the third game left them in third place. However, it actually was enough to see them pass the group stage as a third place finisher. They went on to face Jordan in the semifinal. Um, and that game pitted Vietnam with an average age of just 21.1 against a mature and experienced second tier Jordan team whose average age was 28.5. Vietnam went down a goal on 6 minutes before halftime, but they were fiery after that, equalizing 6 minutes into the other side of the break. Vietnam looked the more likely after that, but the game went to penalties, which they won. They gave Japan a good game in the quarterfinals, losing only 1-0 on a penalty, so very competitive.
Yeah, and if we kind of go back and look at the qualifying there, they finished not quite high enough to reach the final round of World Cup qualifying in round 2 of 3, but in round 3 of 3 they went undefeated and finished behind Jordan, who they beat in the cup, but in second place there to reach the cup. And as you said, they lost to Iraq and Iran in the cup, but beat Yemen. But the real achievement, and I think we said it was in the semi-final there, but actually it was in the round of 16 where they beat Jordan on penalties and then finally went out in the quarterfinal. So a very young team, but now, Connor, that team is I guess 4 years older, so really kind of coming into maturity. So a bit of excitement about what they're going to look like in this cup.
Yeah, and you're right. You're right to correct me that it was the round of 16 where they met Jordan, not the semifinal. But yeah, 21 years as an average age is really, really young.
Unbelievable, yeah.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
half your players, in theory, are below that. Yeah, I think it will be interesting to see a more mature Vietnam team in this tournament.
Yeah, that would put them at about 25 now, so kind of getting into their prime. Okay, well, let's look at the other recent tournaments and take a look at the World Cup in 2022.
Yeah, so that's the tournament that also served as qualifying for this Asian Cup. They joined in the second round. That was a 5-team group stage. And they finished second behind the United Arab Emirates, ahead of Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia. So a couple of local Asian rivals there. And that actually proved good enough to qualify them for the Cup straight away and put them into the final round of World Cup qualification. Once there, though, they were out of their depth, and which was a bit disappointing because Vietnam was seen as a team on the rise. They managed only a home win over China until a surprising draw in Japan in the final game, gave them another good result for their record. But they lost their other 8 matches. So though good results at the game level, at the campaign level, it was last out of 6 in the final round, despite really having done well to reach there.
Yeah, they did actually spoil Japan from taking first place, so a bit of a feather in the cap there. Okay, and then we'll look at the local cup there just in 2022. That is the Southeast Asian region.
Yeah, so they in the group stage they tied Singapore, but then beat Malaysia, Myanmar, and Laos to finish first in the group. The semifinals are two-legged, home and away. They beat Indonesia in the semifinal, but then met rivals Thailand in the final, and they lost, tying 2-2 in Vietnam, but losing 1-0 away from home.
Yeah, they just can't seem to get the better of Thailand, even in that 2022 semi-final round, where they finished way ahead of Thailand. They tied them in both games, so it's a kind of a rivalry similar to South Korea and Japan there. Okay, and then the most recent tournament was qualifying for this Asian Cup, and as you said, 2022 World Cup qualifying was the qualifying round for them.
Yeah, and because they reached the final round of World Cup qualifying, they qualified directly after round two, not having to play kind of a round three. So that's a pretty good achievement for them. As we said, they finished behind UAE, but narrowly. They're actually ahead of UAE going into the final match, which Vietnam lost on the road to the United Arab Emirates. But Vietnam finishing ahead of Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia.
Right, so at least they got to watch their rivals Thailand have to play a further round of qualification while they didn't. And once again, we're skipping the players section, but we'll catch up with that later and moving right on to our last team in the group, Indonesia, beginning with an overview of their participation and general strength. Sorry, I'm having a bit of trouble with the graphics here.
Yeah, so Indonesia, surprisingly, has a very long history, first entering the World Cup in 1938 and qualifying for it. They entered again in 1950, but withdrew then and several times thereafter. It was only in 1974 where they completed qualification for the first time. Considering their history, they were late in joining the Asian Cup, first entering that competition in 1968. However, they've never failed to complete qualification in either competition until 2018 when they were disqualified. That was a punishment that was a punishment in World Cup qualification, but it automatically meant disqualification from the 2019 Asian Cup.
Yeah, so they've been out of a bit out of the picture recently, and then came back into the picture. Their regional group is the ASEAN Football Federation, so the same as Vietnam there. And once again, that stands for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. The first tournament took place in 1996, as we saw with Vietnam, and is held every 2 years. Indonesia has participated in all 14 editions, and although they've never won the tournament, they have finished second 6 times.
Wow.
Yeah, and then going back to their overall strength, in terms of strength, their successful qualification for the World Cup was under the name of the Dutch East Indies there in 1938. And that makes Indonesia the first Asian team to ever qualify for a World Cup. So that is a wonderful mark in their record. In truth, though, they are generally a third-tier team who have never otherwise reached the World Cup, and indeed have never reached a final round of World Cup qualifying. Third tier also means generally struggling to reach the Asian Cup, and it took them until 1996 to do so. Though they did qualify 4 times in a row after that, they didn't pass the group stage any of those times, and they have not been at the Asian Cup since 2007. 2019, with the Cup expanded, gave them a better chance, but as we saw, they were disqualified for that Cup. And yes, in the local cup, we saw that they've never won it, but they finished second 6 times. So a respectably strong third-tier team there, Connor.
Yes, yeah, certainly compared to, kind of similar competition there.
Yeah, let's move on to their World Cup record and a bit of a closer overview.
So Indonesia's 1938 World Cup run consisted of 1 game, a 6-0 loss to the mighty Hungary. They returned in 1958 and played 3 games to pass round 1 of 3, but refused to play in Israel and became the second of several teams to withdraw in an ugly worldwide round of anti-Semitism. From 1974, they played in groups which sometimes involved teams from the Oceania region. They invariably earned a few points in every campaign, but usually finished in the bottom half of the table at the semi-final stage of qualifying. They challenged strong teams only at the game level, never enough of the campaign level to come close to the final round. They were disqualified in 2018. That was for government interference in the sport, and they returned with a weak showing in 2022.
Right, and we'll look at that most recent campaign, but let's move on to an overview of the Regional Cup, the Asian Cup. And they have a better record actually in the Asian Cup. Here they came close to qualifying for the Cup in 1972, agonizingly close in 1984 and 1988, and then finally made it in 1996. And as we noted, they qualified 4 times in a row from 1996 to 2007, though they've never made it past the group stage. 2011 saw them tying all 3 teams in the qualifying group, but finishing last in that group. And then their disqualification for the 2018 World Cup automatically carried into the 2019 Asian Cup, of course, because the first round was also the first round of Asian Cup qualifying. But they did successfully qualify for this Cup in 2023, and they have a better chance now, the expanded Cup, allowing a bit more opportunity for third-tier teams like Indonesia. Let's take a bit of a closer look at their regional tournaments before doing the deep dive.
So Indonesia is one of the stronger teams in a weak ASEAN region. Stronger alongside Thailand and Vietnam. Though they've never won the tournament, as we said, they finished second 6 times. That includes 3 times in a row from 2000 to 2004, coinciding with their Asian Cup appearances and making that their strongest period. Their most recent second place finishes were in 2016 and 2020, though they sandwiched a somewhat shameful result in 2018, coming 4th and 5th in the group stage behind the weak Philippines and Singapore.
Right, they weren't banned from the local cup there. Okay, and then we go back to the Asian Cup to look at the regional cup finals in detail.
All right, so that Indonesia did not come close to reaching the final round of World Cup qualification should mean they fall short of the Asian Cup also. However, they have a better record here and did come close several times before finally reaching it in 1996. And that initiated 4 appearances in a row.
Right. Well, the first in 1996 began well against Kuwait. Sorry, I'm a bit behind in my graphics here. Indonesia went up 2-0 against Kuwait and held the lead until the 73rd minute, when Kuwait scored the first of their comeback goals, and the game ended in a draw. That was the easiest opponent, though, and then they lost to South Korea and to host UAE to finish last in the group stage, actually behind South Korea, who finished third but managed to pass as a third-place team there.
2000 was almost a carbon copy. It was an opening draw with Kuwait again, this time goalless, and that was followed by a loss to China, who went up 3-0 after just 15 minutes into that game. Though it only finished 4-0. And then it was South Korea again in the third game, and they lost 3-0. They finished last. South Korea once again passing in third place.
Yeah, not a good period for South Korea there. 2004 started with a win over Qatar, but they met China. They were the hosts there. Met China again in their second match, and this time they lost 5-0. They lost to Bahrain in the third game, but at least finished third this time in the group stage. That wasn't an advancing position, though. In 2007, they qualified automatically as one of the 4 Southeast Asian hosts. They once again started with a win, this time over Bahrain, who had effectively knocked them out of the previous cup. But once again, it was followed by 2 losses, and once again to South Korea in the third match. In game 2, actually, they had been competitive with Saudi Arabia, dominating the first hour of the game, but eventually losing on an injury time goal. And that competition in 2017 or 2007 was their last appearance in the Asian Cup. But 2023, of course, reignites their histories in the final. So let's take a look at the 2019 Asian Cup. Of course, they didn't actually qualify for it, so we'll just be looking at qualifying there.
Yeah, and not much to say here because they were disqualified for government interference. So they were in a 5-team group with Thailand, Iraq, Vietnam, and Taiwan, but their disqualification turned it into a 4-team group.
Yeah, right. So the fact that they were placed in a group means that that came after the preliminary round, but they didn't play any games. All right, well, that's that then, and that moves us on to their next most recent tournament, the 2022 World Cup.
Yeah, so they weren't one of the bottom ranked 12 teams required to play in a preliminary round. So they came in the second round group stage. They came in as a pot 5 team, just 1 point in the rankings behind Malaysia, who did have to play in the preliminary round. The group stage proved that it should have been them who played in the preliminary round. They were grouped with Malaysia, who finished third, while Indonesia earned only a single draw with a poorly performing Thailand and finished last in round 2 of 3 in really what was a feebly uncompetitive performance, just a single point from their 8 matches.
Yeah, they're really usually not quite that weak, and in this group of Southeast Asian teams should have done better, but perhaps recovering from the disqualification, maybe they hadn't developed their team over the prior years. And this is a bit more true to form, the local cup there in 2022, the ASEAN Cup.
Yeah, so they joined in the 5-team group stage and finished second behind Thailand, who they actually tied on points ahead of Cambodia, Philippines, and Brunei. They beat all those 3 teams. That paired them in a 2-legged semifinal with Vietnam, and as we saw, Vietnam was victorious, though narrowly 1-0 on aggregate.
Yeah, and that's the pretty hot Vietnam team that I'm excited about going into this cup. So a bit unlucky to meet them at that point. Let's finish with how they qualified for this cup.
Well, despite finishing last, with just a single point from the 5-team group stage that was doubled as World Cup qualification, they were put into a playoff that kind of gave them a second chance. They actually had to play kind of a preliminary playoff against Taiwan, which they won. And after that, they were put into a 4-team group, and Indonesia did well to finish second, beating Kuwait, a pretty strong Kuwait team, before losing to Jordan, and then finishing with a 7-0 victory over Nepal. So finishing second of the 4 teams there qualified them for the Asian Cup.
Yeah, so here they are. And again, the expanded Asian Cup is allowing some third-tier teams there, and we'll talk a little bit about their prospects. Once again, we're going to kind of delay the player section to another media cast, and that actually brings us to the end of part 2, the history section. And I hope you enjoyed that. And we're going to go now into comparing the teams in terms of their pots and their rankings and their head-to-head records.
All right. So the pot 1 team, we'll talk first about the where they came from in the pots. There are 4 pots, and teams are basically ranked from 1 to 24 and divided into the pot. So Japan are the pot 1 team and actually are the highest ranked Asian team in this tournament. So obviously a very strong team. And then Iraq kind of likewise is the strongest team from pot 2.
Wow.
Vietnam come from the middle of pot 3, so kind of, middle of the pack of kind of the next group of 6 teams. And then Indonesia come in as actually the lowest ranked team in the tournament. They were bottom of pot 4. So that's how things sit in terms of pot order.
Yeah, interesting. So Japan and Iraq from the top of their pots, Vietnam from the middle, and Indonesia from the bottom. How do you rank this group in terms of difficulty?
I think, in Japan, you have, I guess, the highest ranked team and arguably the top team. And then in Iraq, they probably couldn't have got a stronger team from that pot. So I think this is really difficult. I guess on the other hand, you have the weakest team in Indonesia. So from their perspective, they can consider themselves unlucky to have been grouped with 2 such strong teams. Vietnam also knowing that they've got quite strong teams. Kind of as difficult a draw as it could have been.
Yeah. We got to keep in mind though that the 4 of the third place finishers will pass to the round of 16, so that does give them a bit of a chance. If it was just the top 2, I'd say Vietnam and Indonesia would have been in tough.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at the FIFA rankings. That's the same graphic there.
Yeah.
Yes, beginning with Japan.
So Japan is currently 20th in FIFA rankings and 15th in the ELO rankings, a system we tend to favor. And actually, they've kind of shot up a little bit, especially in ELO, following their really strong World Cup performance. Kind of before that, they were often in the 20s in FIFA and around the 30s, kind of low 20s in FIFA and kind of high, around 30th to 32nd in ELO. So they've always been kind of a top 30 team in the world, but recently they can kind of claim top 20 status.
Yeah, I think Asian teams in general have kind of moved up a little bit. So I think 20 years ago we would never have seen an Asian Cup in the top 20 or top 30, but certainly deserved. I was just looking up to see how much their recent win over Germany moved them up, and it bought them actually just 1 point. But yeah, I think they're right to be around 20th.
Yeah. Moving on to Iraq, they are 70th in FIFA, slightly higher, 57th in ELO. That's kind of where they've been roughly in both systems for the past couple years. Yeah, not much more to say. Other than that, they were as low as they were actually below 100 in the FIFA rankings in 2017. So they have improved since then.
Yeah, I mean, and I'd say in recent years they've been a pretty solid second-tier team. But honestly, when it comes to facing the top-tier teams, they're a bit out of their depth. So quite a ways behind Japan, I would say.
Yeah. Vietnam is 95th in FIFA and 107th in ELO. Both of those are actually improvements, kind of from within the last 5 years. Before that, they were below 100 in both systems, and actually kind of as low as 144th and 150th a decade ago. So they've kind of shown slow and steady improvement to climb up to around 100th mark in both systems.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm very excited about their new generation. I'm really hoping that they'll do something. But in truth, they really haven't shown an awful lot, and I think the ambitions for them have fallen a little bit flat. Let's hope for a little more in this cup. But we've seen that, even against second-tier teams, they're still not really challenging them. So I think I'm glad they're in the top 100, and that is an improvement. But they'd need to challenge second-tier teams to really rise above that.
Yeah. And then Indonesia, they are 150th in FIFA out of roughly 200 teams, and 138th in ELO. Both of those are slight improvements over a few years ago. Before their ban, they were once kind of around the 170th mark in both systems. They didn't play during their ban, but after then they've kind of risen steadily. But as we said, they come in as the lowest ranked team in the tournament.
Yeah, they seem to be getting a little bit better in recent times, maybe recovering from the ban. But as you say, it's not like they were particularly strong before the ban. So a third-tier team all the way, and definitely recently quite a ways below Vietnam. So this seems pretty right. Okay, let's take a look at them in terms of head-to-head, and we'll begin with Japan versus Iraq.
Yeah, they've met 7 times. This is in either World Cup or Asian Cup qualifying or group stage. Japan has a better record, 5 wins, 2 draws, and no losses.
Yeah, and actually they've met quite a bit since 2014. That's 5 meetings since 2014. The most recent one was in 2018 World Cup qualifying, the final round there. And Japan has won all of those meetings in recent times, except for the last one that Iraq managed to get a tie out of them there in 2018. Yeah, who's next?
Japan versus Vietnam. 5 meetings have gone similarly. Japan 4 wins and a draw is their record.
That's right. And we saw that draw in 2022 World Cup qualifying. The draw in the last game, maybe Japan took their foot off the gas, but it cost them first place in the group. So maybe Japan has a bit of a bone to pick with Vietnam here.
That's right. Japan and Indonesia. Japan has 2 wins and a draw from their few meetings.
Yeah, they haven't met since 1990, so pretty irrelevant there.
But I guess we should point out that Japan are undefeated in play against these 3 teams.
Yeah, against all 3 of them. That's good to notice that pattern. So, yeah, we pretty much expect them to win all games in that case. Okay, next. What's next?
Next, we have Iraq and Vietnam. And Iraq has a winning record, 3 wins and a draw from 4 matches played.
Yeah, that's right. The most significant of those was in the 2007 Asian Cup final, where Vietnam were kind of, I don't know if they hosted that game because they hosted their group stage, but Iraq won that and knocked them out of the tournament. And their last meeting was in 2019, Iraq winning that one in the 2019 Asian Cup group stage.
Yeah, and then Iraq and Indonesia. They've also met 4 times, and Iraq has the same record as they do against Vietnam, 3 wins and a draw.
Yeah, that draw was in 1974, so maybe too long ago to be meaningful, but they met in the 2015 Asian Cup qualifying round, and Iraq won both of those games there.
And then finally, that leaves us Vietnam and versus Indonesia. They're frequent AFF competitors, but in terms of Asian Cup and World Cup play, they've met 5 times, and Vietnam has a winning record, though it's close. 3 wins for Vietnam, 2 wins for Indonesia.
Yeah, and we should point out that we don't include friendlies and local competitions in this, so they obviously have met much more. The most recent one, the only relevant one really, is in 2022. The last time they met before that in these bigger competitions was in 1994. And in 2022 World Cup qualifying in the semi-final round, we saw actually that Vietnam beat them twice. All right, well, we normally discuss odds at this point. We like to see what the betting people are thinking about things, even though we don't encourage betting. We might have to see if there is any information if and when we do an update podcast, but there's nothing so far on odds to win the group. There may be odds to win the whole tournament, but that doesn't shed a lot of light. So we're going to skip the odds here and move on directly to our discussion of the teams. Okay, so this is the discussion and prospects section. We welcome people from the short version of the podcast to this, and Japan, Iraq, Vietnam, and Indonesia. Let me ask you, do you see Japan as assailable in any way here?
Not really, to be honest. I mean, I think if they show the form that they've shown in, World Cup qualifying, the World Cup, some friendlies since, I think Japan really seems to be in a good period. They've got top players playing in top leagues, and I think they really should win this group easily. A point dropped is possible, but I probably favor Japan to go 3-0 more likely.
Yeah, we did see a bit of a lapse there in World Cup qualifying in that final game where Vietnam took them for a point. But yeah, at the most, I would say, one tie maybe, but it's hard to see them not finishing on top of this group.
Yeah, and it could also possibly come in a game where they've already qualified. If, say, for example, they win their first 2, and then you might see a lapse of the same sort we saw in World Cup qualifying, where it was really a meaningless game for them.
Yeah, it was weird that they did that in the second game against Costa Rica. Kind of fielded
Mhm.
a weaker or an experimental team. I don't know what was going on there. So yeah, they might do something like that here and give someone an in. But inconceivable that they wouldn't finish first or second and advance from the group stage. How about Iraq?
Yeah, I mean, I think Iraq, we saw that they're kind of a second tier team. They were top of pot two. So um, yeah, and kind of taking the longer view, they typically get out of the group stage. We've seen that kind of throughout their history. They've really pretty consistently managed to do that. They don't always go much further, but yeah, I think that there's competition from Vietnam. But so second place, I think is up for grabs. But overall, I would say they would be the favorites to advance in second place.
Yeah, I mean, we did see them lapse a little bit in the Arab Cup. Otherwise, they've been pretty consistent recently, like a fairly strong second tier team. So, not much of a threat from Vietnam or Indonesia. But I do think maybe the biggest possibility of things diverting from expectations would be maybe Vietnam taking points off Iraq, perhaps even winning. What do you think there?
Yeah, I think like with Japan and Iraq, you kind of tend to know what you get. Like Japan tends to win the groups. Iraq often finishes second in a group. This Vietnam team kind of exceeded expectation the last Asian Cup. They got to the final round of World Cup qualifying, and they have a very good young core that's now kind of maturing. So to me, they're a bit harder to place. I think it's very possible that they could have a surprisingly good performance or kind of upset the odds. To me, they're kind of the team that could be perhaps the most variable out of all these teams in the group.
Yeah, I'm of kind of two minds about Vietnam. I really want them to do well, and I hope they do. This young generation is very exciting, and they have, they did take points off UAE and Japan in that final round of qualifying, but it was a bit weaker than I hoped for. I thought they could finish out of bottom in that final round of World Cup qualifying, but they were a bit disappointing there. Not that great in the group stage of the 2019 Asian Cup. They just passed in third place there, but then they were pretty impressive in the quarterfinal against Jordan, and even just 1-0 to Japan. In the round of 16 against Jordan, 1-0 to Japan in the quarterfinal. So they have taken some points off of second tier teams of the level of Iraq, but yeah, I'd almost kind of put it as below 50-50 that they'll do so here. But honestly, if they can get a point off Iraq or off of Japan, who are lapsing, that could give them 4 points to get through to the round of 16, where they may be able to do well.
Yeah, and I think third place they could even go through with one victory. There's going to be some teams that do that. I mean, 4 points would guarantee it, but 3 points could put them through as well, depending on how goal difference and that kind of things works. Um,
Yeah,
and I think comparing Vietnam and Iraq, I mean, both teams were in the final round of World Cup qualification. Um, Vietnam finished last out of six. Iraq finished fourth out of six. So it kind of shows their relative strength against kind of second and first tier teams in the region.
yeah. There is or you mean second and? Did you say second and third?
Sorry, second and first. Just with
Uh,
the with in the final round of World Cup
oh, I see
qualification,
what you
that's who
mean.
they're
Yeah,
meeting.
yeah. I mean, to be honest, like Vietnam haven't really shown it that much. They definitely look stronger against third tier teams, like in their local region, but need to be showing it a bit more. But I'm kind of hoping they can get something out of Iraq
Yeah.
here, just because I'm excited about that young generation.
So you mentioned their young generation and they're perhaps a bit lucky to get through to the quarterfinals in the last Asian Cup. Do you think that was an anomaly, or do you think it is the start of something more positive for Vietnam?
No, I think it could be a positive. As we said in the longer podcast, like the average age of that team was what 21.1 years old
That's
that beat
right. Yeah.
Jordan, and now that group is 25 years old, so a bit more experience under their belt. So as I said, I was hoping to see a little bit more in the final round of World Cup qualifying, but I do think it's possible for them to maybe challenge Iraq and second tier teams. I don't consider that lucky. I consider it that they are an improved team that haven't really shown it as much as they might have so far.
All right.
Indonesia's a third tier team too. They do seem a bit below Vietnam. Do you think they have a chance here?
I don't give them much of a chance. They came in as a the lowest ranked team in the tournament, but also they were quite abysmal in qualifying. I think only 6 teams needed to go through like an extra playoff before the final round, and they were one of them, having picked up just 1 point from 8 matches. So I don't see them taking many points from this group. And in fact, even though Vietnam may be a bit unlucky to be placed with strong teams like Japan and Iraq, being placed with Indonesia, I think gives them a real chance at going through in third place if they can. That's a game they should win. I think they will win it, and they may even be able to change goal difference in their favor.
Yeah, because they could lose some goals to Japan for sure. I mean, I agree with you completely. Like Indonesia haven't really challenged a second tier team like Vietnam has, which gives them some hope. They did beat Kuwait in that final round of Asian Cup qualifying for this tournament. But Kuwait has been in poor form lately, and the other team they beat is Nepal, which is more of a fourth tier team. So they haven't really shown anything. Still recovering, maybe getting a bit better since their ban, but as we said, they weren't really a top team before that anyway. So they'd really have to show something that they haven't shown before to get any points out of this, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if you take away that 7-0 hammering of Nepal, Indonesia are basically in the Asian Cup on the strength of 1 victory, and that was victory over Kuwait. So the expanded tournament helps, but I don't think it's really indicative of their strength.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I always end by trying to pin you down, the elusive Connor, to definitely putting on the line how the group is going to end. So here it is. I'm sticking it to you.
All right. Well, I'm going to stick with the pot order here. I'm going to go Japan, Iraq, Vietnam, and Indonesia. But I do think Vietnam will qualify as one of the best third place, or one of the four best third place teams.
Yeah, I'm afraid I have to agree with you there. I'm kind of hoping that Vietnam can challenge and finish second. Again, nothing against Iraq there. I'm just excited about Vietnam's younger generation. They're a little bit like Japan, very speedy and fun to watch, but of course not as strong as Japan. So I think there's an outside chance of them overcoming Iraq for second place. But if I'm pinned down, I'd still put Iraq in second and Vietnam in third. And Indonesia would be lucky to get any points out of this, just as Japan would be. It would be something of a lapse for them to drop any points in this group.
Yeah. Well, we find ourselves reluctantly agreeing with each other.
I wish there was a bit more to argue about in this group, but it does seem fairly clearly laid out by pot order.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of the look at Group D, and we will see you in our next podcast on Group D.
That's right. We will see you there.
We originally planned to tag on our past, present, and future plans for the MediaCast, but we have instead decided to put a link to that 10-minute video in the show notes. It covers what we're working on and what we plan to do over the next 9 months. We'd like to thank Naver Abachan and Pictabay for the wonderful music you hear in this MediaCast. The title is called Arabic Trap.